This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to another Sports Catastrophe on this date. And on this day, October 26, 1993, it was announced that the NFL would expand to two more teams for the 95 season. And it was hard pressed. There were a lot of people who said, hey, you know what? I think we should be there. And all that. So two cities got to make the NFL a 30-team league. So the NFL had grown. There was the NFL and then proper, and then the AFL was a big rival. Rather than, push them out, the NFL knew they had to embrace the AFL. Tough competition, and they allowed a merger to happen. All the AFL teams that were surviving would be placed in the AFC, the American Conference. There would be some NFL teams like Pittsburgh, Cincy, and Cleveland who would actually budge over from the NFL that soon to become the NFC to turn into the AFC. So that's what happened. There were 24 franchises. I believe 24, right? No, 26. Beg pardon. 13 in each conference. I can't. Yeah, the numbers are right. So 26 teams. And they played in harmony from 1970 to 75 before another expansion happened. Tampa Bay and Seattle would barge in. Seattle would be placed in the NFC, Tampa in the AFC. Hang on a minute. You're maybe thinking, are you nuts, Jeff? Are you real? Actually, I am. The NFL decided in their infinite wisdom to have a terrible expansion draft full of relative nobodies. That's why Tampa and Seattle kind of struggled and had to go through the draft to get their players. But also, they decided to put Tampa in the AFC and Seattle in the NFC for the 76 season so that Tampa would play every AFC team, that's 13 of them, plus Seattle for the expansion bowl, make a 14-game season. Remember, it was 14 games back then, not 16 and not even 17. Seattle would be facing the NFC teams and then Tampa themselves. So then they reversed in 77 with Tampa being put in the NFC and facing the NFC opponents plus Seattle, and Seattle facing all the AFC teams plus Tampa. Seattle and Tampa would stick in conferences this time. So anyway, it was time to expand again. The NFL had been set since 1976 with 28 teams. But then the money came and many cities wanted new teams, expansion teams, for 1995. The process was huge because there were lots of teams that wanted to come in and all that. St. Louis, Memphis, and Baltimore were there alongside Charlotte and Jacksonville. St. Louis figured they had the best chance. They already had an NFL team for many years, but in 1987 they relocated to Phoenix because the Bidwell family wasn't too happy with St. Louis's surroundings and playing on a field where the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team did better than the St. Louis Cardinals football team. Kind of the football people were jealous. Memphis looked like a good fit for an NFL team. Sovereign State, crazy about the University of Tennessee and the University of Memphis in football. It was okay. Baltimore figured the Northeast would be great. And let's not forget, Baltimore had a team. The Baltimore Colts were one of the staples of the NFL from the 30s on to the 50s to the 80s, I should say. Baltimore looked good. But unfortunately, Baltimore had infighting. Robert Irsay moved the team to Indianapolis under the cover of darkness, but he was found out. So he left because Baltimore refused to repurpose or to build them a new stadium for the Baltimore Colts. They wanted the Colts to share with the Orioles. Carolina figured, hey, you know what? We're on Tobacco Road. We might want football. The problem was that the Carolina-based NCAA football teams were not really that great. North Carolina had some good years. Duke, not so much. Wake Forest, meh. Yeah, South Carolina, okay, that's fine. Well, they still had Clemson, too, and Clemson as well. But Clemson was not the powerhouse they are nowadays. Well, they were known for the basketball, but the basketball teams were a different story. And Jacksonville, well, Jacksonville, that's kind of interesting. I know that Jacksonville hosted and keeps hosting the Georgia-Florida world's largest cocktail party game, if you will. But, I mean, that's good weird. It's halfway between the Georgia campus and the Florida campus. And it's interesting. I mean, Miami and Tampa, yeah, you want a third team in Florida, fine. But Jacksonville? Well, where else are you going to put it? St. Petersburg's within Tampa. So what's the third largest city? Gainesville? Maybe. But I don't think they would have won an NFL team. So on this day in October 93, it was announced that Carolina and Jacksonville would get their franchises. Of course, everyone was pissed off in St. Louis, Baltimore, and Memphis. However, all three cities that lost actually got a franchise later on. St. Louis would get a beneficiary of a terrible stadium deal and lack of fan support for the LA Rams. They were playing at Anaheim Stadium, and the Rams were decent, but they kept faltering. So the Rams moved from Los Angeles to St. Louis for '95. St. Louis had a new stadium. They had the Edward Jones Dome. Well, it was called the TWA Dome, but because of a massive, I guess they call it a Concorde crash for TWA, they were facing lawsuits up the yin yang and lost the sponsorship to Edward Jones, an insurance company. So, yeah, St. Louis had a dome stadium in place, and they were happy. Memphis, for a couple of years, actually got the Houston Oilers. Well, the Houston Oilers were in strife. They were looking good and all that, but then they had playoff chokes in 92 to Denver, 93 to Buffalo, 35-3, anyone. And then all of a sudden, Houston looked good for the 93-94 season, and then they freaking blew it to Kansas City and Joe Montana. Houston had some terrible years, and then not enough fans wanted to save the Houston Oilers. Well, they wanted to move out of the Astrodome into a better stadium. But nothing happened. So Bud Adams moved Houston to Tennessee, becoming the Tennessee Oilers, and played their games in Memphis for a few seasons as the Tennessee Oilers. But then Tennessee not only changed their name to Titans, they moved into Nashville in what is now called Adelphia Coliseum, or the Coliseum, or is it LP Field? I don't know. But anyway, yeah. Memphis got their team. Baltimore would get their teams via Cleveland strife and all that. And Art Modell basically saying he had no choice but to move the team from Cleveland. Cleveland was an original NFL team. Well, actually, not completely original, but they were an NFL staple. Good news for Houston is that they got an expansion team, the Texans, in 2002, which is the 32nd and last team to be in the NFL. And Cleveland got the Browns back, in a way, in 1999. So they officially called the Baltimore Ravens an quote-unquote expansion team. And called the Cleveland team, well, it would be like weird, but Cleveland was the 31st team in 1999. And for 3 years, we had to have at least one team be on bye every week. Well, obviously, you can't have 31 games, or 31 teams play in the same week. Awkward. So Carolina and Jacksonville got their franchises. And they actually came out of the gate pretty quickly. Carolina was very close to getting a playoff berth in the first year. Jacksonville wasn't that bad. They were decent. So anyway, Carolina and Jacksonville made some moves. They picked up some players in the draft the expansion draft and the normal draft. And the funny thing is, Carolina and Jacksonville went off like a rocket because their second seasons, the 96 season, they both made the playoffs. Jacksonville got lucky thanks to a Morton Anderson missed field goal for Atlanta, which would have knocked Jacksonville out. And Carolina surprised everyone by winning 12 games and winning the NFC West, even though the Niners still had Steve Young and all that. And Carolina and Jacksonville would both go to their respective conference finals. Carolina beat Dallas on home turf, had to go to Green Bay, though, and lost to the Packers, who eventually won the Super Bowl. The Jaguars had a weird playoff journey. They went to Buffalo, beat them 30-27. in Jim Kelly's kind of last hurrah, if you will. And then they went to Denver, which basically were massive favorites, and the Denver papers called Jacksonville the Jaguars. Well, unfortunately, that failed as Jacksonville shocked Denver 30-27. But the loss was good for Denver because not only did they change their uniforms to the blue, white, and red, well, orange, sorry, the dark blue, white, and orange. They changed their look. They changed their luck. They won the next 2 Super Bowls. But Jacksonville would then falter in New England against the Patriots, and the Pats would lose the Super Bowl. So it all worked out for those 2 teams in the end. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.